When we think about politics, we're usually thinking about the next election, right? Not something that happened 100 years ago. So, why would a governor build his entire vision for the future around a mostly forgotten figure from the 1890s? In this explainer, we're going to unpack a really interesting speech that uses the past as a roadmap for today's political fights. Well, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker sure seems to think so. In a pretty major address, he reached way back to the Gilded Age to argue that the challenges of the past can actually light our path forward today. So let's dive in and see how he makes that case. Okay, so let's look at who we're talking about. At first glance, these two guys seem like they're from different planets. You've got John Peter Altgeld, a progressive leader back in the 1890s, and then J.B. Pritzker, a modern Democratic governor. But Pritzker's whole speech is about drawing a direct line between their two eras, arguing they're not so different after all. So the first thing Pritzker does is kind of reframe our current problems. He makes the case that the issues we're dealing with today, things like wealth inequality and worker safety, they aren't new at all. They're just the 21st century version of the exact same battles they were fighting back in the Gilded Age. And this is where he gets really specific. He literally maps Altgeld's biggest worries onto today's headlines. It's a really powerful point, right? The language might have changed from concentration of wealth to corporate price gouging, but he's arguing that the fundamental struggle for a fair shake is exactly the same. To really drive this home, Pritzker uses Altgeld's own words. And you got to think about this. This was in 1895. We're talking decades before women could even vote in this country. And here's this governor not just appointing women to office, but arguing they should have equal access to every field of activity. I mean, that was a truly radical idea for his time. And here is Pritzker's big takeaway from that. He frames injustice not just as some policy issue, but as a genetic condition. Something we literally pass down to our kids if we don't stand up and fight it. For him, these aren't just old history lessons. They're our responsibilities right here, right now. So, after setting the stage with social issues, the speech really shifts gears. It escalates into a direct power struggle, a governor versus the White House, both then and now. This is where it gets traumatic. Pritzker brings up the infamous Pullman strike of 1894. Basically, the Pullman railcar company slashed worker pay. A massive strike broke out, and Governor Altgeld insisted it was a state matter. But President Grover Cleveland didn't care. He sent in federal marshals anyway. And the result was just tragic. The agents fired into the crowds, and 25 people were killed. Altgeld was absolutely furious. Months later, he was still seething, comparing the president's actions to the absolute power of the Tsar of Russia. For Pritzker, this moment is Exhibit A for federal government overstepping its bounds and interfering in state affairs. Then Pritzker brings that same conflict into our time, but with a modern financial twist. He accuses the Trump administration of illegally confiscating $8.4 billion in federal funds that were meant for Illinois. It's a massive accusation, framing a funding dispute as another power grab from Washington. And then he makes the parallel impossible to miss, using this really vivid language to describe federal agents in Chicago. When you hear words like masked, unaccountable forces, he's clearly trying to make you think back to those federal marshals during the Pullman strike. All right, so after drawing these historical battle lines, Pritzker pivots to the so what part of his speech. His third point is all about Illinois' economic plan, arguing that the state can thrive on its own, even when facing what he calls federal headwinds. And to prove his point, he brings out the numbers. In his speech, he highlighted that the state's GDP has shot up from $881 billion to over $1.2 trillion, and they've balanced the budget every year. He's essentially saying, see, our state-level strategy is working. So what's next? Well, his plan is pretty straightforward. It goes after the three biggest expenses that drain family budgets: housing, electricity, and healthcare. It's a mix of different approaches: cutting red tape for housing, investing in new energy, and directly stepping in to lower healthcare costs. And on that last point about healthcare, he announced something huge. The state has been buying up medical debt, for pennies on the dollar, and then just erasing it. They've already wiped out $1 billion in debt for over 500,000 residents. That's a tangible, life-changing results. This all leads to the end of the speech. And this is where it really takes a turn, moving beyond policy and into something, well, a lot bigger. Pritzker makes this very emotional appeal, arguing that the best weapon against what he calls authoritarianism isn't a law or a budget. It's something much simpler: kindness. Yeah, he basically tries to redefine what patriotism even is. He says it's not about flags and anthems, he calls it love, and he defines that as every single act of courage, big or small, that regular people take to protect and help each other. And to show you what he means, he gives these really specific grassroots examples, like this one. People on bikes showing up every day to buy out entire tamale carts, just so the vendors could pack up and get home safely. Or this one, parishioners literally forming human chains around their churches so immigrant families could go inside and worship without being afraid. I mean, these aren't government programs, these are just people looking out for other people. And finally, he brings it to the most normal place you can imagine, the school pickup line. He talks about moms using their phones and their whistles just to watch out for each other. His message is that this kind of patriotism is happening all around us, all the time. For Pritzker, this is what it all boils down to. He says all the political debates, all the fighting, it's really about one fundamental choice. Are we going to be a society built on empathy and kindness, or one built on cruelty and rage? And that's the final question he leaves us with. By reaching all the way back to the torch of Governor Altgeld, Pritzker is making the case that maybe, just maybe, the most powerful response to a political crisis isn't found in laws or budgets, but in simple, courageous acts of love for our neighbors.